My name is Linda Wright Anderson. I am 70 years old, and I was born and raised in Franklin, West Virginia. Um, I have kind of a unique story. My grandfather was a minister here, a part of the African Methodist Episcopal uh, Church group or conference, and he had several daughters, which my mother was one of them. And so when he moved the family here, um, my mom and dad kind of hooked up, and here I am to prove it. And then we kind of moved from place to place I moved from place to place with my grandparents, who was the minister, and my grandmother. So when I was probably about 5 years old, I met my father's mother and father, and so I just thought they were two strange people coming to visit. And the next thing I know, my grandfather and my mother brought me to Franklin, West Virginia, and that's where I grew up. I think I was probably like 5, because I remember starting first grade at Franklin Elementary, and that's, I completed, I guess, grade school and high school in Franklin, West Virginia. So, but, the only reason I guess I was brought here was because there were so many children in my grandfather, the pastor's home, which was my aunts had children, my mom's children, and so I was the one that was chosen to go live with somebody else because my grandparents on my dad's side was considered, I guess, well off, and so they could afford me. And so that's how I ended up in Franklin, West Virginia with my grandparents and my dad. My dad died when I was 10, so then it was just my grandparents. I would go visit the other side of my family, which were the Cantys, in the summertime when school was out. No, I grew up here on Entry Mountain. There were no black people that lived downtown Franklin. It was 2 black communities, which was Moatstown and Entry Mountain. And the Wrights lived down here on Entry Mountain, and the Moats lived in Moatstown. You were asking about prejudice and racism here. I guess I never knew. The only time that I think that there was ever a problem was when I was in high school. We had a math teacher who was had an alcohol problem, and I was asking him something in class, and he explained to me that I should be able to figure that out because, after all, they allowed us to come down here to school. And I'm like, okay, they allowed us. And at the time I was like, I really didn't know what he was saying at the time, but then as I got older, I thought about it. It's like, And then when, I think it was an English class, we had to bring in our favorite song, protest song at the time, and my favorite song was Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, and the kids that were in my class were all white except me, and they were like, what is that? And it's like, okay, listen to what he's saying. So, they didn't want to hear our music, and Mr. Donut Props told me where I belonged, or was trying to tell me where I belonged, and, it was a privilege that they allowed us to come down here to school. So that's the only form of racism, I guess, because when I graduated high school, it was only 3 black people in our graduating class, and I was the only girl. So, they kind of tolerated me, and I, kind of fit in with them because I wasn't one of those poor black kids. I was more, my grandmother was very prominent in the community, and she was the only black school teacher that had ever been in that school system. So they all knew who she was, and they knew that I lived with her. So, I guess maybe I got a pass, because I kind of integrated with the kids. I didn't sit anywhere with the black kids because there was no black kids to sit with. So I sat with, a bunch of white girls. And I don't know, I didn't feel it until that one incident. I guess we just kind of knew our place. When we were finished with school or whatever, we came back up on the mountain, and that's where we stayed. It never really dawned on me that I was the only black girl in the class because, like I said, I had friends and they were white girls. And then I also had black friends. You know, Motown and Entry Mountain mingled. Not only that, it's like all my cousins were up here on the mountain. And, you know, and it was a community. Even, you know, and that extended to grade school and high school. I guess I never thought about being black, but I was, you know, obviously I was. So, but no, I didn't have any problems, and really did other than that one incident with the school teacher and those kids didn't not liking my music. When I moved to Virginia, I couldn't understand the racial divide that was in Virginia because here in West Virginia, believe it or not, I have a friend, she's deceased now, but 1955, she graduated from Franklin High School. You know, and the schools in Virginia didn't integrate until, what, late 60s, early 70s? You know, so when I went over there, I was like, what? I didn't understand these black people going to an all-black school. I was like, what? I went to Franklin High School. You know, everybody went to Franklin High School. So, no, I guess I didn't dwell on the fact that I was black. But I was just thinking in my head, my grandmother was the only black school teacher in the school system probably for 50 years. But she used to tell me stories about racism. And she used to tell me all the time that if this white kid gets an A, you better get an A plus in order to have some recognition. You can't be, oh, she's an A too, because it will always be, she's an A, but so-and-so did it better. You know, and it's like the things that she had to walk through. She had to be very, very careful, even her dealing with the kids in her classes, because she was a black teacher and they were white. And back during that time, they were allowed to spank kids, and they had a paddle that they did. And she never spanked anybody. She made them spank themselves. You know, it's like, and then there was always this lingering threat that if you don't do it hard enough, Miss Wright's going to do it. She never did it. She never whipped anybody. And I think that was because, you know, the fact that she was a black woman. She was not sure how these white parents would tolerate this woman beating or paddling their kids. So, you know, she made me aware of the fact that I was black and what that meant. There was one girl that she and I were closer than the rest of them, and I did go to her house, but I didn't spend the night. The only person that I was allowed to spend the night with was my grandmother had a friend, Miss Clarice Motes. I'm sure you heard of her. She was a school teacher as well. She had a granddaughter that was my age, and Terry and I were allowed to spend the night. I was allowed to spend the night at Miss Clarice's house, and that's it. Nobody else. I had one white boyfriend, you know, but I finally realized I was only his girlfriend at night. You know, I wasn't his girlfriend during the day or during, you know, high school classes and whatever. He never acknowledged the fact that he liked me. So he was the only one. I just went to a high school reunion. I guess, I don't know when it was, a couple years ago. And I felt more uneasy there than I ever did while I was in school, simply because I expected those people who were my age to know better. You know, and they did. Even then, it was very few of them that acknowledged the fact that I was even there. You know, they kind of stayed over there. And, you know, I had some people that was like, hey, Linda, how you doing? Girl, I'd have known you anywhere. I was like, I guess you would have. I was the only one of me there. Yeah, but I felt more uneasy there. You know, it's like doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs there. And then there was just the common folks. The common folks kind of reached out to me. The elite, they were like, I'm like, okay. I knew my place. Not. Never paid any attention to the difference between how I was treated up here on the mountain growing up with my friends and my cousins. It was like a community here. We knew down there at the school, we just were in school. But when we came home, it was like a whole different world. Nobody. I was telling my children I never remember having to fight anybody growing up, and as I got older and married, my kids came back here with me, and my kids now talk about and pass on the stories that they remember to their children. So it has continued. But back to your question, the difference between downtown versus up on the mountain, I guess I felt, in a sense, safe up here, but I guess I didn't even realize that I was feeling unsafe down there. So, yeah, we played, we would have community softball games out in the cow pasture, and it's like we would pick teams, and, whose team did you want to be on, and then we would have a game of tag that would last days because we couldn't catch Ernest Morgan. He and his sisters were the fastest people on earth as far as we were concerned, and he could jump a fence like a deer, and so this went on and on, and we finally just gave up. It's like, oh, but I can remember I had two boy cousins, Tony and Philip, and it was the three of us. We were like the three amigos, and it's like we were down in the field picking chicken pins and all kinds of stuff that now I look, when I came up on the mountain today, it's really sad, because the first thing you see is my grandmother's house, who was very, anybody that knew her knew the flowers and the upkeep and stuff that she did, and now it's falling down around your head, I guess, and it's just, it's like, I remember Aunt Margie's house, and this person's house, and that person, and I guess the realization that they're gone, and now it doesn't seem like it's a community over here anymore. It's that family bond. I don't think people have it anymore. The only time that they do probably is homecoming. And people come back, but even now, a lot of people don't come back. I often think they feel like they didn't grow up here. But that was our foundation for our lives. So I don't know why people don't come back. They come back to Moatstown for their reunion more so than they do down here on Entry Mountain. My grandparents that raised me were Lottie and Everett Wright. She was a school teacher, and he worked for Sykes Garage for years. And he didn't, he wasn't a mechanic or anything. I guess he just pumped gas and did whatever. But my grandmother especially was very, very, I don't know if the word was strict, but she was very aware of the fact that it would reflect on her, my behavior would reflect on her. And so, I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things that the other kids were allowed to do, like go to the ball games on Sundays, because there was no adult down there, or my grandparents didn't want to go. So I was stuck up here on the mountain. Everybody else was gone. They went downtown to play ball, but I was stuck here on the mountain. And then, she graduated from an all-black college in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and she still kept in touch with some of her classmates, and they had their own little club, and I was exposed to those old women. And, and it's like, it was always that you're Lottie Wright's granddaughter, not Everett and Lottie. It was always your Lottie Wright's granddaughter. And even in school, I guess it was always, I was afraid that they were going to tell my grandmother. She was, she was right there in the same school that I was. And it's like, okay, so I had to be on my best behavior. I didn't do anything. I didn't get in trouble or anything in school. So I don't know, it's like, oh, and my other grandparents I was telling you about earlier, the Cantys, Reverend Canty. I remember them, and I remember I had a slew of cousins and uncles and aunts. And I know several of my aunts and my uncles were around my age. Actually, I have an uncle that I'm older than he is. And, so that bond that I had with them, Plus what was going on in Franklin, it was like it was two different worlds. I can tell you that between my grandparents and my mom. My mom, in the summertime, that's where I would be with my mom and her parents. And so, and then when I would come back to Franklin, it was like, okay, it was like the two faces of Linda. Which face are you going to get? So it was difficult for me. It really was. But I was thinking, and my daughter and I were talking about living over here. Would I do it again? Would I do my childhood again? Like, yeah, because of that community, and it was the kids. It wasn't so much the foundation of the adults, but it was the kids. We all looked out for each other, and there was never a fight. I don't know. The only bad kid that we knew of was this guy named Butch Anderson. Butch could swear like a sailor and threw rocks at people. He was so bad. He was like 5, and he was terrible. But we kept in contact because he lived in Stanton as well, until his passing. But we kept in contact, and we would sit down and tell stories about each other, what was happening in Franklin when we grew up. So it was, I would grow up again, here, again. Hearing ball games, when I got old enough to play, my Uncle Calvin coached the team. So I guess my grandmother figured that he would watch out for me, him and Aunt Beverly. So we had an all black female team. Nobody could beat us. It was like, then we knew, so like them white people over there, they thought they were going to beat us. No. And I remember this one lady, Linda Faye Weimer. I still remember her. She just thought she was bad. Well, we taught her a thing or two. And I played softball for a long time with, and that camaraderie that we had as a community, because there were girls from Moatstown that played on this team as well. It was Intermountain and Moatstown, but they were all female, all black. And we were talking about people, how they identify. There was a lot of people over here that identified as being black, but they were white, and it's like, I never could figure out why they did that, why they chose to be black. But they did. And here we are, a lot of them married black women or, black men or whatever. But I still haven't figured out why those people wanted to be black. But I'm glad they did. They were some good people. But we played softball. Oh, in this church, I used to play the piano for the choir in this church, and that's the piano that I played on. The church is different. I was kind of like the choir director, and I was 15 maybe, because I moved out of my grandparents' house when I was 17. So I used to play for the church, and it's like different people. I can remember stories, not stories, but the Loves. There was Reverend Love and his family. They used to live, there was a parsonage right over there, and Ms. Love used to sell ice cream. And you would go raising money for the church. Go to her house and get ice cream. Then after they left, my grandmother started selling, she had a Pepsi machine in our backyard. People would come and buy Pepsis out of the machine, and she also sold candy, raising money for the church. Or during, I guess, February, towards Valentine's Day, she would make pies, and I would help with that, making a pie. I can't make one now from scratch, but I did then, and she would take them downtown and sell them, and it's like, it was just, I don't know, it was fun. I knew how to can, I knew how, all those things that have left me now, because, if I didn't have to, I can go to the store and buy a can of green beans, and it's like, or whatever. I do miss that community here, I live in Stanton, Virginia, and my neighbors, I don't know who they are, And here on Entry Mountain, everybody was either kin to each other, and I was going to say friends, but basically everybody was kin to each other, So, we knew everybody, from start to finish. Uh, I don't know if anybody told you about the socials that we used to have every Saturday. Uh, Somebody would either Boatstown or Entry Mountain would have a social, and basically it was a dance. It was a community dance, and didn't matter how old you were or how young you were. We all came to the schoolhouse, and people came from miles around. I remember people coming from Elkins, West Virginia, which is like 60 some miles, to come to the social, and it's like that was a big thing. And now it's like nobody does anything. They do it, I think, at homecoming, but that's the only time. But it used to be every Saturday night somebody had a social, and back then too. I don't know if it was, I shouldn't say this, white guilt, but I can remember there was a dentist here. His wife came to up here on the mountain and started a 4-H club or something to make sure that we would have, I don't know, I can't say privileges, but that we would do things. We had the 4-H club, and then we would go to Seneca, Mount Seneca, which is I don't know how many miles away, to skate. They would take us all, these little black kids, to skate over in the all-white community. Yeah, but now it's like, from what I'm hearing from the people that are still here or connected here, nobody does anything anymore, and that's sad. That's really sad. 1972, I got married and moved to Stanton. I actually was still in high school. I used to come over here and get my schoolwork, whatever the classes that was required for that time, and because I was over here every weekend because my grandparents were still alive, and I would come over here and get my schoolwork and then go back to Stanton and bring it back, back and forth. So I graduated from Franklin High School. I missed my graduation because I was busy having a baby at the time. So, but I did my diplomas from Franklin High School. But I was a married woman in a senior in high school. Yeah, Franklin Elementary. She taught 7th grade, I think. I think it was 7th grade. She taught, I know, penmanship, because I sat for hours at the table learning how to write correctly, and now they don't even teach, what is it called? The cursive. They don't even teach cursive anymore. Nobody knows that. I made it at work. I made an assignment one time, and I used cursive to spell out people's names. They had no idea who they were, even. I was like, that's your name. They didn't know that. But like I said, my grandmother, hours, drilled that penmanship and English into my head. I don't like English now, but I'm aware of the fact that I can write cursive. My favorite subjects now, if I had a subject, would be history, because it just fascinates me why people do what they do, and I still can't figure them out. I guess if I did, I would probably be ranked up there with some saint or something, but I can't figure them out. Why? People are so, I guess, evil more than anything. I understand goodness, but I don't understand evil. And it's like, that was part of growing up, too. You knew bad people. Even in this community, we had people that we weren't supposed to, well, not so much associate with, but just be careful of your association with those people because they had a reputation. And a lot of times the reputation was not at all true. And sometimes those people that they were upholding were the worst people in the community. And the people that they liked were the best. So it is what it is. As a young girl, there was a lot of, I don't want to say, I guess in a sense it was sexual harassment. As a young black girl growing up, there were old men, when you started developing breasts or something like that, they would pinch your breast, or pat you on your back, on your backside or whatever. And, I remember this man coming, he had a motorcycle, and he was riding all the girls up and down this road, and he wasn't riding the boys. And come to find out, while he was riding the motorcycle, his hand was in places it shouldn't be. So he was driving one-handed and fondling the girls, And I think that was a big problem. They don't talk about it, but it was a big problem. It was, it's almost like if you were a girl, you were expected to do these sexual things, and it didn't matter. It's like, I just know what I grew up with, and I know I had friends the same way, grown men. I guess it was molestation. And to move past that and to call it what it is or what it was, has been a struggle for me. And, it's like when I talk to friends and I ask them about it, and they're like, that's in the past. But how does it affect your life? Well, I don't think it does. That's their response. And I'm like, well, you're better than I am because it has affected me. It's like I said, I was married when I was 17. And it's like my husband, he wasn't but like 2-3 years older than me. But still, he was grown. And here I was. And my grandmother her thing was, she said to me, when she found out I was pregnant, she said, if you're going to do what married people do, then you get married. And I'm like, okay. I just took that to mean what she said. But then I found out years later that my grandmother had my dad and had lived, her parents didn't even know he existed until he was like 5, because she lived in Fairmont, West Virginia, and she kept it a secret that she had this child. And it's that whole thing of the sexual thing, Chip and Eddie and Terry are all my cousins, pretty much because my grandmother, I guess pretty much what I'm saying pretty much is they're the closest cousins that I have up here, because their grandfather and my grandmother were sisters and brothers. But my grandmother would not acknowledge that fact until she was way later in her years, because she used to say, well, they say. And she finally admitted to me, yeah, I think he was my brother's child because he looks just like him. And he, which is Eddie and Chip's them dad, his name was Nelson. He wasn't allowed to call my grandmother Aunt Lottie, and that was his aunt. And everybody else was, but he had to call her Miss Lottie. And I've never understood that, and that makes me angry in the fact that you would do that to your nephew. Why? It's like, you can't tell me why you did that. Well, what did she say her famous saying was, I wasn't bed pillowing her post. I'm like, what? I wasn't bed pillow, which means that I wasn't there to see who did whatever. I'm like, okay. But she wouldn't, until probably a couple years before she died, she acknowledged the fact that Terry's dad was her nephew. So, she had to keep that look, that upstanding Lottie Wright thing that she had going on. And that was hard. It was hard for me. And I think, when it was almost like when I was forced to get married, it was because she didn't want the community and the white community to know that Lottie Wright's granddaughter was pregnant. And that's why I moved away. Nobody knew I was having a baby, except the people over on the other side of the mountain in Virginia. Over here, when I came over here was on the weekends, and I stayed up here on the mountain. They knew it, but the folks downtown, the white folks, didn't know that I was pregnant and having a baby and whatever. But, I don't know. It was just, I think more so, I struggled more so as far as racism. I struggled more so with Lottieism. The fact that my grandmother was who she was, and she had to uphold that reputation and that whole, not demeanor, I don't even know what the word is I want to say, she just wanted the community to think she was one thing when actually she may have been something else. And she was multifaceted, but she couldn't accept that in the fact that, okay, it's okay to be human. Okay, it's okay to make mistakes, and it's like, it doesn't make you a bad person. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem that I had growing up here. My grandfather, completely opposite. He he was, I guess, my favorite person in the fact that he was mean as he could be. The kids would talk about him being grumpy old man because you didn't walk on his grass. He was one of those kind of people. But he also had hogs, and he would go to the grade school and pick up their garbage from that day, and we would bring it home on the back of his truck and feed it to the hogs. And I was happy as I could be sitting up in that truck with my grandfather. It didn't matter to me that stinking truck. It's like, oh, you're the garbage man. He taught me. He took me fishing. And it's like he was not judgmental at all. And he would actually correct her. It's like, you need to stop, Lottie. You need to stop. So yeah, my biggest problem was was growing up with my grandmother and that whole facade that she had to keep up. As I look back over it now, it was almost like child molestation and incest was a norm here in these communities, and nobody said anything. And if they did, it was always the victim's fault. You asked for it. I can say I did hear that once from one of my aunts here. Well, what do you expect? Look at her mama. And they were talking about my mom. My mom had her first child when she was 15. Excuse me. So they're like, she was fast, so they expected me to be fast. Well, I wasn't. But people thought that I was, and it was based on the fact that what my mother did. And it's like, my mom was 15 when my sister was born, and then she had me when she was 18, but